Sir, I'm going to have to ask you one last time. Remove the hat or leave the premises. The voice rang out loud and clear, cutting through the hum of conversation in the crowded Horizon Valley Mall. A tense silence spread across the atrium as shoppers paused to watch the confrontation unfold. In the center of it all stood Daniel Hayes, a man who looked completely at ease despite the mounting tension around him. His red hat, with bold white letters spelling "Stand Strong," seemed to glow under the harsh fluorescent lights. Facing him was Vanessa Ortiz, the head of mall security, her arms crossed and her expression hard as steel. "I'm not causing a disturbance," Daniel said calmly, his voice steady and deliberate. "I'm just shopping like everyone else. If you're asking me to leave, I'd like to see the specific policy I've violated." Vanessa's patience was running out. "It's not about a written rule," she snapped. "It's about maintaining a safe and welcoming environment for all our patrons, and your presence is making that difficult." Daniel raised an eyebrow, a faint smile playing at the corner of his lips. "A safe and welcoming environment?" he repeated, his tone laced with quiet irony. "For whom?" Vanessa took a step closer, lowering her voice but not her intensity. "This is your last warning. Either comply or we'll have to escort you out." Daniel didn't flinch. "If that's what you feel you need to do, then go ahead. But remember this moment, Ms. Ortiz. You're going to regret it." The crowd murmured in hushed tones, the weight of Daniel's words settling over them like a heavy fog. Vanessa hesitated for a fraction of a second, but the pressure of onlookers and the insistent glare of Marissa Clark, the woman who had initiated the complaint, spurred her into action. "Brian, escort him out," she ordered curtly, gesturing to the security officer at her side. Brian hesitated, his face betraying his discomfort, but a sharp look from Vanessa propelled him forward. "Sir, please come with me," he said, his voice tight. Daniel adjusted his hat slightly, gave Vanessa one last steady look, and then turned to walk toward the exit. His strides were slow, deliberate, as if to give everyone watching time to reflect on what had just happened. As the glass doors slid shut behind him, Marissa crossed her arms with a satisfied smirk. "Finally," she muttered under her breath. But Vanessa, despite her outward confidence, couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something wasn't right. That should have been the end of it, a minor incident resolved, a disruptive shopper escorted out. But sometimes the smallest moments carry the heaviest consequences. What Vanessa and Marissa didn't know was that the man they had just removed wasn't an ordinary shopper. Daniel Hayes was the new owner of Horizon Valley Mall. And by the time the next day ended, their lives and the culture of the mall itself would never be the same. Next up, what led to this heated confrontation? To understand, we need to rewind to the bustling Saturday afternoon when everything began. A few hours earlier, Horizon Valley Mall was at its weekend peak. The sun streamed through the massive glass skylights, casting warm golden patches on the polished floors. Families bustled in and out of stores, kids begged their parents for snacks, and groups of teenagers wandered the halls, laughing and sharing videos on their phones. The mall was alive, a thriving ecosystem of commerce, conversation, and casual entertainment. Among the crowd, Daniel Hayes moved with purpose, his posture relaxed but his sharp eyes taking in every detail. He wasn't here as a shopper, though he looked the part in his faded jeans, gray jacket, and signature red hat. Daniel was here on a quiet reconnaissance mission. A private yet meticulous real estate magnate, Daniel had purchased the mall just a week ago, adding it to his growing portfolio. Known for his hands-on approach, he wanted to experience the mall as any other customer would. His plan was simple: blend in, observe, and make mental notes for improvements. The first thing Daniel noticed was the energy. The mall had a pulse, a lively rhythm that told him it was still a valued part of the community. But beneath the surface, small cracks were beginning to show: overcrowded seating areas, understaffed food court counters, and a slight but noticeable tension in the air. Daniel adjusted his hat and smiled to himself. Plenty of room for improvement, he thought. Across the atrium, Marissa Clark was nursing her iced coffee, her eyes scanning the bustling scene. A young graphic designer with a knack for spotting trends, Marissa came to the mall every Saturday to relax and people watch. But today, her casual outing was interrupted when her gaze landed on a man in a red hat strolling past the food court. Her mood soured instantly. "Are you kidding me?" she muttered, glaring at the hat. To Marissa, the words "Stand Strong" weren't just a slogan, they were a symbol of everything she opposed. A knot of discomfort formed in her chest as she watched Daniel pause at a kiosk to admire a display of handmade bracelets. Her friend Zoe, seated beside her, raised an eyebrow. "What's the problem now?" Marissa gestured toward Daniel, her tone sharp. "That guy, look at what he's wearing." Zoe squinted, then shrugged. "It's just a hat, Marissa. Let it go." "It's not just a hat," Marissa shot back, her voice rising slightly. "It's a statement, and honestly, it doesn't belong here." Zoe sipped her drink, clearly uninterested in engaging, but Marissa's discomfort had already morphed into a simmering frustration. Near the main concourse, Vanessa Ortiz was making her rounds. As head of mall security, she prided herself on her ability to keep Horizon Valley Mall running smoothly. She wasn't just a leader, she was a fixer. Someone who handled problems before they spiraled out of control. Vanessa's day had been uneventful so far, but when she saw Marissa approaching her subordinate, Brian Palmer, with a determined expression, she knew her quiet shift was about to take a turn. "Excuse me," Marissa called out, her voice sharp as she flagged down Brian. Brian, who had been chatting with a fellow officer near the food court, straightened up immediately. "Yes, ma'am? How can I help you?" Marissa gestured toward Daniel, who was now browsing a kiosk near the center fountain. "That man's hat, it's offensive. It's making people uncomfortable." Brian blinked, following her line of sight. From where he stood, Daniel appeared completely harmless, casually flipping through a rack of sunglasses. "Ma'am," Brian began carefully, "I understand your concern, but wearing a hat isn't against mall policy." Marissa crossed her arms, her tone sharp. "It's not about policy, it's about the message he's sending. Are we really going to let people like him make this place hostile for everyone else?" Brian hesitated, unsure how to respond. He could feel the tension radiating from Marissa, and the way she said "people like him" made him distinctly uncomfortable. "All right," he said finally, trying to defuse the situation. "I'll speak with him." As Brian approached Daniel, Marissa watched with satisfaction. To her, she was standing up for what was right, protecting the mall from symbols of division. But what she didn't realize was that her complaint would set off a chain of events far beyond her control. Next up, what happens when Daniel is confronted? Will he back down or stand his ground? And how will the other players react as the situation escalates? Stick around. The real fireworks are about to begin. Brian approached Daniel with measured steps, the weight of Marissa's complaint pressing heavily on his shoulders. As a security officer, he was trained to handle situations with calm professionalism, but this felt different, more personal, more precarious. "Excuse me, sir," Brian began, his voice steady but polite. "Can I have a moment of your time?" Daniel turned from the sunglasses display, raising an eyebrow. His expression was calm, almost curious. "Of course. What's this about?" Brian hesitated, his eyes flickering to the red hat. "We've received some complaints," he said carefully, "about your choice of attire. A few patrons have expressed concerns that it's making them uncomfortable." Daniel tilted his head slightly, studying Brian's face. "Uncomfortable?" he repeated. "How exactly does a hat make someone uncomfortable?" Brian shifted uncomfortably under Daniel's steady gaze. "It's not the hat itself, sir. Well, some people feel it carries a message they find divisive." Daniel's lips curved into a faint smile. "And what's divisive about the word 'stand strong'?" Brian had no good answer for that. He hesitated, his training telling him to tread carefully. "Look, sir," he said finally, "I'm just doing my job. If you'd consider removing the hat while you're here, it would help keep the peace." Daniel's smile didn't falter. I see, he said, his tone polite but firm. And is there a specific policy at this mall that prohibits customers from wearing certain hats? Brian blinked, caught off guard. Not exactly, but then I think I'll keep it on, Daniel interrupted gently. His voice was calm, but there was an unmistakable edge of resolve in his words. Watching from a distance, Marissa's patience snapped. He's arguing, she muttered to herself. She glanced around and spotted Vanessa Ortiz near the entrance. Without a second thought, she marched over to her. "Miss Ortiz?" Marissa said, her tone sharp. Vanessa turned, her professional demeanor unflinching. "Yes? How can I help you?" "It's about that man over there," Marissa said, pointing toward Daniel. "Security spoke to him, but he's refusing to comply. He's causing a disturbance, and something needs to be done." Vanessa's eyes narrowed slightly as she followed Marissa's gesture. She saw Daniel standing calmly at the kiosk, speaking with Brian. From her perspective, there didn't seem to be a disturbance, just a conversation. "Causing a disturbance?" Vanessa repeated, her voice even. "Yes," Marissa insisted, her frustration evident. "That hat, it's making people feel unsafe. We can't just let this slide." Vanessa took a deep breath. She had dealt with difficult customers before, but something about Marissa's tone struck a nerve. Still, she nodded professionally. "I'll handle it." Vanessa strode toward Daniel with purpose, her heels clicking sharply against the tiled floor. As she approached, Brian stepped aside, relieved to have backup. "Good afternoon," Vanessa said, her tone firm but polite. "I'm Vanessa Ortiz, head of security here. I understand there's been a discussion about your hat." Daniel turned to face her, his expression as calm as ever. "There has," he replied, "and I've been told some people find it divisive." Vanessa nodded. "That's correct. We aim to create a welcoming environment for everyone, and your attire has sparked some concerns among our patrons. I'm going to have to ask you to remove the hat or leave the premises." Daniel crossed his arms, his gaze steady. "And if I refuse?" Vanessa didn't flinch. "Then we'll have to escort you out." The two stared at each other for a long moment, the tension between them almost palpable. Shoppers nearby slowed their steps, drawn to the unfolding scene. Daniel finally spoke, his voice calm but resolute. "I've done nothing wrong. I'm not causing a disturbance. And I'm certainly not breaking any rules." Vanessa's jaw tightened. "That may be true, but we have the right to ask anyone to leave if their presence disrupts the atmosphere of the mall." Daniel tilted his head slightly, a faint smile playing at the corners of his lips. "Disrupts the atmosphere? Or challenges someone's assumptions?" Vanessa's patience was wearing thin. "This is your last warning, sir," she said, her voice growing colder. "Either comply or leave." Daniel's smile didn't fade. "If that's your decision, then do what you have to do. But remember this moment. You'll regret it." Vanessa felt a flicker of uncertainty at his words, but she pushed it aside. "Brian," she said curtly, "escort him out." As Brian reluctantly stepped forward to guide Daniel toward the exit, whispers rippled through the growing crowd. Daniel didn't resist. His steps were slow and deliberate, his composure unshaken. Marissa stood nearby, her arms crossed and her expression smug. "Finally," she muttered under her breath. But Vanessa couldn't shake the unease settling in her chest. Something about Daniel's calmness, his quiet confidence, felt off. Sometimes, the real impact of a decision isn't felt until it's far too late. Next up, when the truth about Daniel Hayes is revealed, Vanessa and Marissa's decisions will come back to haunt them. What happens next will change everything. The next morning, Vanessa Ortiz arrived at her office earlier than usual. She barely slept the night before, her mind replaying the confrontation with the man in the red hat. Something about his parting words haunted her. "You'll regret this." Her unease turned into outright dread when she opened her inbox and saw an email marked urgent from Alan Price, the regional director. The subject line was stark: "Emergency meeting, new mall owner." Vanessa's heart skipped a beat. "New mall owner? Could it be? She quickly made her way to the conference room, where she found Brian already seated, nervously fidgeting with a pen. Marissa, uninvited but clearly intrigued, had stationed herself nearby, looking smug as always. Moments later, Alan Price entered, his expression grave, but it was the man following him that made Vanessa's stomach drop. Daniel Hayes. He wasn't wearing the red hat today, but there was no mistaking the calm authority he exuded as he took a seat at the head of the table. His sharp gaze swept over the room, lingering on Vanessa just long enough to make her shift uncomfortably. Alan began without preamble. Good morning. As you're all aware, we've called this meeting to address a significant issue that occurred yesterday. He gestured toward Daniel. This is Mr. Daniel Hayes, the new owner of Horizon Valley Mall. The air in the room seemed to evaporate. Vanessa froze, her mind racing. Brian looked like he wanted to sink into the floor. Even Marissa, for once, was speechless. Daniel leaned forward, his tone calm but firm. I was the man escorted out of this mall yesterday, he said. Not because I broke a rule, not because I caused a disturbance, but because of an assumption. An assumption based on a hat. Marissa's face turned crimson, but she didn't speak. Vanessa opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. Alan's tone grew sharper. Mr. Hayes contacted me directly after the incident. He described behavior that goes against everything we stand for: bias, unprofessionalism, and a failure to treat our patrons with respect. Daniel interjected, his voice steady. Let me make one thing clear. This isn't about me being the owner. It's about what this incident represents. If I, as a customer, can't wear a hat without being judged and removed, what message does that send to the community? What does it say about this mall? The silence was deafening. Alan turned to Vanessa, his expression cold. Ms. Ortiz, as head of security, you escalated this situation unnecessarily. Your role requires judgment, professionalism, and fairness, all of which were lacking yesterday. Effective immediately, you are relieved of your position. Vanessa's breath caught. She had prepared herself for some form of reprimand, but termination. She tried to speak, but Alan silenced her with a raised hand. Your decisions reflected poorly on this mall and our brand, he continued. There is no room for personal biases in your role. Vanessa nodded stiffly, her face pale. Alan's gaze shifted to Brian. As for you, while your role was less direct, you failed to push back against an unjust situation. You'll remain on probation and undergo immediate retraining. Brian nodded, his face flushed with embarrassment. Understood, he mumbled. Finally, Alan turned to Marissa, who looked like she was trying to disappear into her chair. Ms. Clark, as a customer, you have the right to express concerns, but your behavior yesterday, demanding action based on personal feelings rather than objective facts, was unacceptable. Your actions contributed to this entire mess. Consider this your only warning. Marissa nodded quickly, her bravado completely evaporated. Daniel took a deep breath, softening his tone slightly. I don't believe in punishing people for the sake of it, he said. This isn't just about holding individuals accountable. It's about creating a better culture. He turned to Alan. I want mandatory training implemented for all staff, security, management, and even vendors. The focus needs to be on professionalism, respect, and understanding. Alan nodded. We'll make it happen. And one more thing, Daniel added. I want a new policy prominently displayed at every entrance and throughout the mall, a customer respect code. Let it be clear that this is a place where everyone, regardless of their background or appearance, is treated with dignity. A week later, the changes were already taking shape. Training sessions were underway, and large signs bearing the customer respect code were posted at every major intersection in the mall. Daniel walked the concourse one afternoon, observing the lighter, more welcoming atmosphere. Employees greeted customers with genuine smiles, and even the previously tense security team seemed more approachable. As he paused near the food court, he spotted Marissa sitting alone, her face downcast. Their eyes met briefly before she looked away, clearly embarrassed. Daniel chose not to engage. This wasn't about humiliation, it was about growth. Sometimes, the best way to teach a lesson is to let people face the consequences of their own actions. What do you think? Should Daniel have been harsher, or did he handle the situation the right way? And have you ever faced judgment based on assumptions? Share your story in the comments below. We'd love to hear it. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the notification bell for more stories that make you think. Thanks for watching. In the days that followed, Horizon Valley Mall underwent a quiet but noticeable transformation. Employees, from cashiers to custodians, attended the new mandatory training sessions. These workshops didn't just focus on customer service, they delved into empathy, unconscious bias, and the importance of professionalism in maintaining a welcoming space for everyone. For Daniel Hayes, the changes weren't about saving face or avoiding bad press. This was personal. His vision for the mall wasn't just a place where people shopped. It was a community hub, a space where everyone felt they belonged. On a sunny Saturday morning, a week after the incident, Daniel decided to visit the mall again. This time, he left his red hat at home, opting for an understated navy jacket. He wanted to see the results of his efforts firsthand. The first thing he noticed was the atmosphere. It felt lighter, more open. Staff members greeted customers with warm smiles, security officers engaged politely with shoppers, and even the food court employees seemed more attentive. As Daniel made his way through the concourse, he spotted Brian at his usual post near the fountain. This time, instead of looking tense, Brian stood confidently, chatting with a family and helping them locate a store. Daniel gave him a small nod of approval as he passed, which Brian returned with a grateful smile. Near the food court, Daniel noticed a familiar face, Marissa Clark. She sat alone at a corner table, her coffee untouched, her expression distant. For a moment, Daniel considered walking over to speak with her, but he chose not to. Marissa caught sight of him briefly, her face flushing with embarrassment. She quickly looked away, pretending to check her phone. Daniel didn't hold any resentment. He understood that change, especially in perspective, takes time. Sometimes, the most powerful lessons aren't taught through confrontation, but through quiet reflection. At the mall's central atrium, Daniel paused to admire one of the newly installed customer respect code signs. The bold letters read, "At Horizon Valley Mall, we respect everyone. Regardless of your beliefs, background, or appearance, this is a space for all. Together, we stand strong for community, understanding, and dignity." Daniel smiled to himself. The sign wasn't just a policy, it was a promise. As Daniel walked toward the exit, sunlight streaming through the glass doors, he felt a quiet sense of accomplishment. This wasn't the end of the story, it was the beginning of a new chapter for Horizon Valley Mall. What about you? Have you ever experienced judgment based on assumptions? Or have you had to make a tough decision that taught you something valuable? Share your story in the comments. We'd love to hear it. And remember, sometimes the smallest moments can teach the biggest lessons. Thank you for tuning in to this story of growth, respect, and second chances. If this made you think, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a story. See you next time on Elderly Wisdom.